I'm Jody.
And I'm Kat.
And you're listening to Felons and Families.
Jody and Kat are not lawyers, nor are they therapists. The following conversations are based on work and life experiences. The information and advice provided are opinions only and should not replace the advice that can be obtained from a lawyer or licensed therapist.
All right, so today we're going to talk about the stigma, just the stigma of, and we keep saying felon because it tends to be mostly felons, people worried about a felony on their record. But just even being arrested and knowing that you're pending a case, there's a stigma involved in that because even just being arrested and then, of course, all the way leading to an actual felony, a person thinks that assumes that you lack morals, you lack ethics, you're just an overall bad person. I know you've been arrested.
Yes, unfortunately, I've never been convicted of a felony. However, I've been arrested multiple times. And, you know, when people say, well, so-and-so, have you ever been arrested? I have to bow my head and say several times.
Right.
And it's embarrassing. And then I know that their opinion of me is probably going to change because of it.
There was probably even people that you didn't want them to know.
Yeah. So what do? Do you lie and hope they don't find out?
Right.
It's embarrassing.
I would imagine too, having children that following even just the arrest, we haven't even gotten to an actual adjudicated case like a felony conviction. I would imagine worrying about your children's parents finding out.
Yeah, we had an interesting conversation.
Like your children's friends' parents is what I meant.
Well, you and I've had an interesting conversation, and that's kind of what brought us here today.
Yeah.
You know, you're a federal probation officer, active at the time that we first met, and I had to be forthcoming and honest with you and let you know, well, hey, I kind of have a record.
Right.
So I'm sure that changed your opinion about me some.
Actually, it didn't. I'm really open-minded. I could sense the person you were. I had met your daughter.
I am,
but I understand.
Sweet. Oh, sorry.
I understand where that fear would come from. Yeah.
Yeah. But thank you for giving me that. A lot of people aren't as willing.
Well, again, we're back to once a felon, always a felon. If that's going to be our opinion, and again, you didn't even have a felony, but to assume that you're a bad person just because you got arrested one or a few times, you had a bad period of time in your life. I look at the overall person. I think it's important to ask those questions. How long ago was this? What have you done since that time to improve the situation? Meaning, if your arrest had been really recent and you're still clearly looking like you're on drugs and you don't seem to be on the right path, we would not have been friends.
Yeah, if you felt like you had to put your purse up when I came over, it would have been different.
Absolutely. If I felt that my daughter was going to be in danger coming over to your house, well, not only can I not be your friend, neither can she be your daughter's friend. Have they accepted? Did they accept their wrongdoing? They owning it? They're working to get past it. They've paid their debt to society. You know, they're person who owes restitution, they're paying that. Those are the things that the people should be looking at. Hopefully any employers out there might be listening, should be asking those questions. What kind of work did they do while they were in custody, for instance? Because if they did nothing while they were in custody, that's questionable to me. I find that interesting. If they come out of custody and they take no culpability, and now the caveat, there are some people that believe they were innocent. Some people might have actually been innocent. But we're talking about the majority of the population that's in custody, in my opinion, had some culpability. And that means that they did something.
Agreed. There's usually something in there that has led to their conviction.
Right. But today's episode is about, should that stigma constantly follow a person? For instance, when we talk about employment. Luckily, I think some employers are coming more around. Like I know Home Depot, Amazon, they're coming more around to hiring people with a record. but it's incredibly frustrating when I believe that there's employers that aren't.
I recently had to do a background check for employment, and I was scared.
Right.
I didn't know what was going to come up. Luckily, all of my arrests or whatnot have been longer than 10 years, so it doesn't show up. But if you were to do like a live scan or something like that, it's going to show everything.
Yes.
So there's a difference too between background checks and how far back they go. But in California, you can only go back as far as 10 years.
Yeah. Well, for federal cases, it's interesting. Not all companies even know to run federal. So I would tell my people, you might get lucky, but they might be doing a kind of a cheaper version of a background check and not catch the federal offense. And I've actually seen that happen. Where I also find it frustrating is sometimes consumers have this attitude or opinion that why would they hire a felon? I saw that in Uber and Lyft, where I had people prior to the arrest working for companies like that, and they were making good money, supporting their family. And then they get the conviction and they get a new background check just by happenstance, and they'd get fired. Yet they had a great record working for them.
See, maybe I'm a little biased there. I think that depending on the felony,
sure,
on the case-by-case claim of what crime they committed, maybe you might hire somebody to work in a kitchen. They can be a cook or a dishwasher. But I don't know if you necessarily, if their crime was involving money, if you'd want them to handle a cash register.
No, I agree. No, I'm glad you brought that up because that's a really good point. I'm not saying a blanket over all felons that the stigma should not be used. What I mean, to your point, so identity theft, for instance, identity theft, probably not near a cash register, probably not taking those people's debit cards and those people's credit cards, customers' credit cards. But there are people that have certain types of charges, let's say illegal immigration, bringing over an illegal immigrant. That person can't be a driver for a company to drive people?
Would you feel safe?
Yeah.
I don't know if I would.
Why?
Because if they can bring people one way, maybe they'll bring them the other.
Oh, you're thinking about trafficking.
Yeah. I mean, it's...
Okay.
If they're
all right, that's fair.
Yeah. So.
Okay. Let's see. Drugs. Selling meth on the street.
Drug schmugs.
Okay. I'm just saying maybe employers could be a little discerning as to what the job is. Obviously, like a sex offender case, even a hands-off sex offender, which means that they were viewing child porn, they can work in a warehouse if there's no children.
Yeah, definitely.
Right.
And that's another thing, construction work, a lot of restaurants hire felons, warehouses hire felons.
Correct. Right. I had mentioned earlier that some people feel that they were innocent. But I wanted to talk about the levels of feelings that go on that's encompassed in that embarrassment of having been arrested or having a felony, because those levels go from guilt from the belief that they are 100% guilty. They know they did it and they still feel incredibly guilty. And they're afraid to tell everyone, like we talked about a moment ago. The feeling that they're not even deserving. They feel like they did a little something, but it's not so bad that it should reach the weight of like federal supervision or formal supervision. Then there's the people that were believing that they were fully downright not guilty of anything. And so then there's anger. There's a lot of anger and resentment towards the government, towards whoever they think set them up or whoever they think got them into this mess. I've heard that, a lot of transference. They thought that they were just helping their brother out, for instance. Next thing they know, they've got a full case.
And I wonder if that's going to be a mitigating factor into their success outside of supervision.
Yeah, maybe. I think the attitude that you have, for sure, has a role. I would get people coming out of custody, and if they were ones believing that they didn't have anything to do with it, they didn't understand what the big deal was, or they believed they got set up. Their anger and their family's anger, everyone believing that same narrative would view the intrusion of probation in a very hostile way. Mm-hmm. And we'd have to sort of break down those barriers. And to make a point as to one of those stories, I had this long time ago, this case. I couldn't remember the name of the fruit. I tried finding it, couldn't remember it. I remembered it being something like lumpar fruit, but I looked it up and I couldn't find it. It was an Asian fruit. And I had this truck driver, and he was an importer of this particular fruit. And he was only allowed by law to bring it over frozen. So by law, this fruit could only enter our country frozen. So he goes into custody and he gets out, and he is so mad at the system, at the government, my mere existence, the fact that I'm going to be supervising him and have control over parts of his life for the next 3 years. He was so angry. And I was trying to get to the bottom of it, why he didn't think he was guilty. Because, you're asking it's a very simple case. Well, is it true that you brought fresh lumpar fruit? I'm using that word because I can't remember the name of fruit, into our country when it was only allowed to be frozen? He says, yes, but it's legal now.
Oh.
That's what was making him so angry. He just happened to be caught in a time in which the law said it was illegal. He was in prison when the law changed, the view on the fruit changed. And suddenly now fresh fruit can come in.
I can see why he would be the way he was. I'd be extremely
That's
angry.
a tough pill to swallow.
But you still have to buckle down.
Yeah.
Do your commitment and be done with it.
Right, because
you can't change it.
While I felt for him, I mean, that would be tough. But the reality is, at the time, it was illegal. And you knew that, and you still chose to bring the fruit in. But throughout the supervision time, I don't think I ever got him truly comfortable with the fact that he got in that kind of trouble. Begs the question, too, did he need to spend that much? I don't remember the amount of time in custody, so I'm not going to state it. But I mean, maybe a fine and a warning. And if you get caught again, I don't know. Maybe I'm too soft.
I don't know. First offense. There's so many worse things he could have brought in.
That's kind of my thought, too.
Yeah.
How is it that bad?
I mean, how dangerous are the fruit flies?
Was it a truck full of drugs? I don't know. Maybe we're just not prosecutorial enough to understand.
Or we don't understand the etymology that's involved with that.
I don't know. So my next story is really going to it challenged me. I was so frustrated by this story. Did you know that did you ever see those contact lenses that were like tiger eye, cat eye?
Any smoke shop you go into, any off-brand 99-cent store.
Halloween stores.
Do
you know all that's illegal?
Store. No, I had no idea.
I had no idea either. I remember my daughter wanting those contact lenses, and I never purchased them, probably because I'm cheap and I just didn't feel like dealing with it. But so here's the case. There was these two women that were in like one of those big shopping center kind of malls, and they each had like a beauty supply store. One was more catering towards wigs and hair extensions and that sort of thing, while the other one was more product of skincare and, lotions and things like that. And they were business owners. Those kind of stores are just packed with stuff.
Oh yeah,
just
wall-to-wall.
Wall-to-wall supplies. And the story is that they had a vendor that showed up selling these little contact lenses. It's just this tiny little display on the counter, minimal to what they're really selling in that store. Clearly, these contact lenses isn't how they're making their living.
Yeah.
And they sold them. FBI comes in. They get cited. And they're staring at federal probation all of a sudden.
Wow.
They got convicted. Luckily, no jail time, $10,000 fine. And now they're going to be on federal supervision for 3 years. One of these women had cancer, and only to exasperate it because of the worry and the stress that she was feeling this whole time. I couldn't believe it.
Who even knew it was illegal?
Right. And
it's such an everyday occurrence that we see out in the world.
Right. She even told me that she saw the vendor back in the parking lot. So she called the agent to say, hey, the vendor who sold me this is here. And the agent wasn't interested in coming out.
Can you believe that?
Yeah. Well, I was so incensed by it. So part of what I had to do was go and see if there's what's called third-party risk. My job is to go into the store, see does she have her contact lenses out, check on the store. When I walk in and see the amount of product this woman had in her store, I thought to myself, what am I doing here? Why am I here? Why would this lady ever do this to herself again? She paid the $10,000 fine. I immediately turned around and sent a letter requesting for early termination. My supervisor let me do it. That was unheard of. These people had just came on to supervision. I immediately turned around and submitted a request for early termination. The prosecutor called me angry. Why are you requesting early termination so early? This person has just barely been on supervision. I said, because it's a waste of my time. She's not a risk. That's not how she made her money. The woman's never going to do it again. I was shocked that the judge signed off on it. I think even the judge was rolling his eyes on this case.
Yes, it's clear who had common sense here in this case.
Yes. What I would like to mention, though, when we talk about the attitude coming onto supervision, unlike the Asian man that was selling the Asian fruit, he was angry, right? He was angry in approaching supervision in this hostile way. These women were humble. I couldn't ask for early termination on the other lady because she had to make payments on the $10,000 fine. But they were humble. They just told the story. They understood it wasn't my fault. They understood that I was just part of a system that they were stuck in. And it created an interest for me to want to help them. We go back to the earlier episode of biases, and you're dealing with humans, you're dealing with people. And so I encourage people that are in the system to remember that, because she didn't ask me to do early termination. Even her attorney never asked me to do that. I just was able to listen to her because she was able to speak to me in a kind, normal, professional way. And it resonated to be true to me, her heart and where her motivations were coming from. And it interested me then to fight a little harder for her.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. So that's just, I think it's important for people to think about how they're going to approach probation or law enforcement, because it can help you. The last story I have is, do you remember a program called the Officer Next Door program?
I don't.
Okay. So the Officer Next Door program was this idea that you would take a location in the community that's kind of ran down, lots of crime happening in the area. And they would give breaks to law enforcement to purchase a home in that area. The idea being that if they had smatterings of law enforcement people living in the community, that the community would start improving on their crime rates.
Well, the restaurant industry kind of has the same standard or thought.
Okay.
That's why they give a lot of police officers and fire and EMTs discounts. It's because if they have more officers eating in their restaurant, they're less likely to get robbed.
Oh, wow. Did not know that.
Yeah.
So this program, though, it was federal aid. It was like a federal amount of money. I don't remember exactly how it worked, but you got some sort of federal money that would go towards your down or something like that. But you had to live in it. So you couldn't, what a lot of law enforcement people were doing was trying to think of ways to not live in it and use it as a second home, like rental property.
Yeah.
It was such an enticing idea. I remember my husband and I talking about it. Now that I'm retired, I can be honest about that. But I remember my husband and I kind of discussing it, because it would have been so easy for us to get a second home, start a rental thing going on, right?
Yeah.
And I remember saying to him, well, how would they know? Are they really going to, what, do they have a force that goes out and checks to see if you're really living there or not? But of course, whenever you think something bad, you start thinking of the consequences. Hopefully, if you have good cognitive skills, you will walk yourself back out of that bad thought, which is what we did, and didn't do it. Well, I ended up with the one case in all of my years who did it. And she had been an officer of a certain branch, I'm not going to say which. She did exactly that. Her anger on supervision was just so immense, and yet she had been an officer. She was so angry. She lost her career. She was so angry and bitter. She never had to go back to court, really, but it was so unpleasant dealing with this woman because she was just so angry and bitter. And I kept thinking, she knows better. Calm down. This will be easier for you. It won't feel so, I can't even think of the word. It was just so hostile. Every time I had to see her, I'd have to drive around the block and just catch my breath before I have to go see this woman.
Like you said, she knew, coming from law enforcement,
Right.
what the exact consequences were.
Yeah.
And maybe she was more angry at herself.
I'm sure she had to have been. I remember she had some sort of deniability about it as well. Like she argued that she really wasn't renting it or something like that. She was trying to backpedal out of it. But yeah, the way you view your case and what mood or mental position that puts you in will largely affect how supervision is for yourself. So what can you do to sort of get yourself out of that mindset is consider trying to be more honest with yourself as to what the word culpability is. If there's got to be likely some culpability of yours in there. And if you can be honest about that and at least focus there, maybe that can help ground you a little bit. Make sure you're willing to discuss the truth with at least somebody that's intimate to you, a partner, somebody you can trust with that information. That cleansing might be of help. Seeking counseling can be of use. And there's options for counseling if people can't afford it. People throw out counseling. So I'm not saying therapy isn't necessary, but we throw it out there as though that's financially feasible. And some people don't have the financial funds to just go and pay for a therapist. There are some options out there. If you've got insurance, for instance, there is Department of Mental Health in every county. They are getting a little more and more difficult, though, because a lot of these county probation and federal probation are starting to utilize the county services more so that we don't have to pay for it. And that's putting a dump of services into the county. So it's getting more and more difficult for them to take your average case that's just situationally depressed because they just got arrested. But they are an option.
There's also drug counseling meetings, AA, NA, and Al-Anon for families of drug addicts.
Yes.
They might also have resources to other counseling programs that are not known to the Department of Health. Right.
Okay. Good. That's good. Online counseling services are popping up, which I understand are cheaper. And then there are church counselors. If there are members of churches, a lot of these churches, the counselors are licensed therapists as well. So there are some options out there for counseling. And then make a list of your good qualities. If you're really feeling that bad about yourself, as we were talking about earlier, your arrest or your felony doesn't define you. It's not all you are. So make a list of your good qualities just to remind yourself of what actually defines you. And then the last thing I'd recommend is volunteering. I remember when I was a young girl, I was in my early 20s, and I found myself in a depression. I was actually on medication for depression. And I started volunteering basically as advice from my therapist just to get me out of the house. Mm-hmm. It was following a bad breakup. And I didn't know what to do with this extra time that I was used to spending with my boyfriend. And I found that helping others can really take your mind off of your own issues.
Yeah, there's a saying in recovery, we keep what we have by giving it away.
Yeah.
Means in order to stay productive, stay happy, we have to help others achieve the same happiness.
Yeah, that's good. That's a nice way of closing us out.
Thank you.
Well, Kat, do you have anything else you want to share?
Yes, I just want to put out some information for felons that might be looking for employment and having a hard time finding it. There's a website called Simply Hired. That's www.simplyhired.com or jail2job.com. That's jailtojob.com.
Great, thanks. Next week, we will discuss young Hispanic women being targeted at the border. Well, we have lots to discuss, but we want to hear from you as well. If you have a story that you would like to share or a topic you would like to hear us cover, please email us at F as in Frank, A as in Apple, F as in Frank at felonsandfamilies.com. FAF@felonsandfamilies.com. If you like us, help us out by subscribing. You can hear us on all the ways that you can get a podcast, or you can go to our website, felonsandfamilies.com. I'm Jody.
And I'm Kat.
And you're listening to Felons and Families.